And I think the first thing I'll say is that if we want to perfect our colonic intubation, we need to ask ourselves three questions. What problem do you have if you're not progressing? Or what problem do you expect to occur? So very often I'm watching the imager as the procedure is going on, and I just know what's going to happen next, and I make preparations for that. I don't wait for the problem to arise. So once you know what the problem is, what's the solution, or what are the solutions, and finally, how are you going to execute the solution? And I would put it to you, without the imager, you're only guessing what the problem is most of the time, not all the time. Without the imager, you cannot be sure of the solutions. And as I'll illustrate a bit later, without the imager, you cannot apply the solutions absolutely perfectly. And if you apply too much clockwise torque, you send the tip of the scope as pointing anteriorly, and you send the tip of the scope all the way around the front and to the back by applying too much clockwise torque. And this is a reverse splenic, right? So it's very difficult to reduce that where we are, because if you try and rotate the scope anti-clockwise, which will reduce it, then you just twizzle the scope round like on its long axis, right? So you need to get round a bit further, reduce the size of the loop, and then apply anti-clockwise torque. Anyway.
I'll be talking about, indeed, virtual chromo endoscopy, other imaging modalities for the trainees especially. So objectives to get an overview of currently available imaging modalities in lower GI endoscopy, and to understand why it's useful to have different modalities for different indications. Maybe a nice prerequisite from the ESGE technology review from 2016 is that to be effective, all of these imaging technologies, you have to have some basic endoscopic elements, such as a high quality prep, but also people that know how to do colonoscopy and are trained to use these imaging technologies. A small timeline. So we started with HD white light, widely available in the late 1990s, and starting 2005, several different imaging modalities were developed. And it was actually from 2005 that we had the advanced imaging modalities available with just a flick of a button on our endoscopes. Made a small division into the virtual chromo endoscopy, the image enhancements, and the other technologies. So I'll start off with the virtual chromo endoscopy. So what is it? It's pre-image and post-image processing. I think we've covered this in another session as well. But this highlights the vascular and mucosal pattern. It's used for lesion detection, but mostly I think it's used for lesion characterization. It's used for a lot of classification systems, such as the NICE, WASP, JNet, CRIS, etc. Also used for scar assessment and other types of characterization. So some examples for those who don't know what it is. NBI in Olympus, so it gives a different pattern. BLI for Fuji and iScan for Pentax. Same polyps, but with virtual chromo endoscopy. And so we use it for the different classification systems, as already mentioned. Is there a difference in using NBI or iScan or NBI or BLI? Actually, there isn't. They are all equivalent for lesion characterization when you use the same classification systems, but you need training. So also for scar assessment, it's quite accurate if you combine white light and NBI, as for a study from Lopke, very nice study. What about lesion detection? So it shows that it's not better than white light in general. But if we look at, so another study that showed the same thing, but if they stratified according to people, endoscopists that were experienced in using NBI and NBI screening, then they saw that they had a lot higher adenoma detection rates, also mean number of adenomas per patient, polyp detection rate, etc. was a lot higher in those that know how to use it. So to conclude, to compare it to white light. We can perform accurate characterization of lesions, prediction of histology, when you combine it with classification systems and or a standardized imaging protocol, if you are adequately trained to use it.
So there was a very long redundant colon. So because of that, I've elected to go with the CF scope, which I have to say is my preferred option, unless there is, severe diverticular disease or something like that. Obviously, I've all the things that we talked about before. So we're underwater. We've got the near focus on. We're just going incredibly slowly here. We're just allowing the tip to find a way. The foot is not on the water pump all the time. We just add a little bit of water, open it up, just wait. And then if necessary, we can put some gentle pressure to get around the next fold. But then I think it's imperative in this sort of colon that you then pleat the colon. And having got around the corner, we're gonna just allow the scope to straighten itself up. And you do that by some gentle traction. We're not quite round this corner. And the other thing running through my mind as I'm doing this is, if it's a really redundant colon, whilst the left lateral is ideal for water immersion on the left colon, gravity is affecting the loops.
So I'm going to just take you through a quick run through of distal attachments, when and why and how to use them as well. I think you would have noticed probably throughout the seminar that you probably, for almost all cases, you would have seen a distal attachment at the end of the script. And there is a reason for that. It's not just random. These are the lecture objectives, and let's just get into it. So when we're talking about distal attachments, essentially we're just talking about attaching something to the tip of the scope. So there's two main streams of attachments, and that would be a cap and a cuff. A cap is essentially an attachment which projects distally beyond the tip of the scope. And by projecting distally, what you're achieving essentially is you're achieving a little bit of distance between the lens and the tip of the scope. So what that does is it basically keeps the mucosa off the lens. So it allows you to get maintain view without getting red out or white out. A cuff is a little bit different. It attaches over the scope, and it essentially has prongs on the side of the cuff, and those prongs are used to, they elongate beyond the scope radially, and they're used to basically stretch out folds. You then get hybrid devices which do a little bit of both. So they project distally, and they have radial prongs as well. I've included the GI as a distal attachment. It's not quite the distal attachment, but I've included it here because it essentially is meant to do the same thing. So it's a little inflatable balloon at the tip of the scope, and what it's essentially meant to do also is to straighten out folds to achieve better mucosal visualization.